Welcome back to the book club. This morning I finished up reading The Traitor Baru Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. This is a book about political intrigue, a kind of messed up empire taking over an island, and a savant girl from the island in revenge trying to take over the empire by becoming part of the empire and, maybe one day taking them down from the inside. For this review, I'm going to be going over the plot, the characters, the pacing, and will I keep reading the series, yes or no? And I'll be rating each of these categories out of a 10 and sort of explaining them a little bit. And I'm not going to be spoiling the book, so I'll be talking very generally about things that happen, maybe mentioning a few character names here or there, or things that happen very early on that aren't really spoilers. But to get started, what I thought about the plot, I gave this a 7 out of 10. So the world building in this book is very interesting. The empire that takes over Baru Cormorant's island is called the Masquerade, or the Empire of the Mask, or the Imperial Republic. There's a few different names that they use throughout. And it's this like brutal regime that's like kind of Nazi-like in some ways, which is like what happens if science goes too far. For example, they're very into eugenics and experimenting with breeding the various races to figure out like which pairs of people are good to breed together, and they don't allow they call being unhygienic anybody who's not like a heterosexual person. They believe that like it's one man and one woman to a family, and that's like not what happens on the island that Baru Cormorant comes from. And in all sorts of messed up things, and like that whole backstory is very interesting. It's very compelling, and this girl is like a very smart savant girl who is basically indoctrinated because her island gets taken over at a young age and is put in part of these schools. But she is, intelligent enough to not be indoctrinated and instead vow to like pretend to be indoctrinated and take them down from the inside. The overall plot and the like subversiveness within this plot line is very catchy, and there's a lot of political intrigue, and that is like a large percentage of this book. Most of this book is meetings and talking about things to do, and like talking about what resources people have and all of this stuff. Pretty early on, Baru becomes an imperial accountant, and there is like a lot of accounting type things that goes on. So that part of the plot is where I take away points, because honestly, it got very boring at times. I'll talk about this a little bit more during the pacing section, but this part was just not for me. Towards the end, there's some battles and there's some more exciting action that goes on, more direct political intrigue, you may say, which sort of hooked me again. But the middle section is quite weak in my opinion, and once you learn about like all this setup, it's really fun and interesting. There's this like boring stretch in the middle, to me at least, where it's just all political intrigue, people talking about meetings about meetings, that kind of thing. And it felt like I was at work, and I was like, I don't like, how many pages left do I have? But the ending is exciting again, and so like there is some worthwhile payoff there. Now, talking about the characters, this is where my review is going to start to go south a little bit. I think the characters overall are a 5 out of 10. The main character, Baru, is probably the only character that's like memorable and good, in my opinion. In this book, she goes to another island or another nation where there's, I think, 14 or 12 dukes and duchesses that are ruling the island. And they all have like different names, like the Duke of Bananas or something. I actually don't even remember. I finished this book this morning. I don't even remember what one of the dukes was. There was one guy that was like the pirate duke or whatever. The problem with the characters is that there's all these dukes and duchesses, and they're all like explained. They're all explained very surface level, and they're not made in any sort of memorable way, and they all feel the same. Another problem that I had with the characters in this book is there's a lot of dialogue in this book, and I thought I was going crazy. At one point, I wrote down in my notes when I was like 200 pages in that I'm having trouble following who's talking in the dialogue, and I don't know if like it's a me problem or what. I don't think I've had this problem before where I'm like getting lost at who's talking during a conversation. But the problem is there's like a lot of meetings in this book because it's a political intrigue sort of situation. And in these meetings, characters are talking back and forth. And I actually saw a comment on Goodreads when I was scrolling through reviews after writing up my notes to see what other people thought. And somebody actually pointed out that like the author uses a lot of pronouns to describe who's talking, but the problem is that you don't really know the characters enough to just based on context and like what they're saying, know who he is referring to. He could be like one of 6 dukes in the meeting, and they're all so much the same, or they all seem so much the same that like it's unclear. Like they all talk in the same way. None of them have different accents or like specific ways of speech or anything that helps you differentiate them. So you're like reading this conversation between Baru and some random duke, and you're like, I don't even know who's saying this. Is this the philosopher duke? Because he should sound different than like his brother Duke, who's not a philosopher and different in some way, but like they sound exactly the same. They all make the same types of arguments in meetings. They all like speak in similar ways. So there's like a real lack of depth of like side characters at all. Like, so the entire story is told through Baru's perspective for the most part, but still like these side characters are all kind of like nothing. They're very important to the plot, but they're all so much the same and not fleshed out at all that like you don't really care about any of them. It's hard to differentiate them, knowing which one's the admiral and which one's the philosopher and which one's married and which one's unmarried. And you know, it's hard to keep track in your head. There's like the easiest way is, oh, well, this one's a man and this one's a woman, so I know that those two are different, but otherwise, like, I don't know how to differentiate them. We learn nothing about the Duchess of Clay, who's this older woman. Like, I don't know anything about her besides the fact that she's the Duchess of Clay and she lives in like some other area and like is unhelpful. You know what I mean? So I have a really hard time saying that the characters in general are good. I think like Baru is a good character, an interesting character, because she is like so methodical and calculating and cold. And you really get to see that through the book, but you don't get to see most of the other characters. And it's been 6 hours maybe since I finished reading the book, and I've already forgotten a lot of them. I don't know their names. I don't remember like what they're the Duke of, even though the author constantly reminds you, because like that's the only mechanism you have by which to differentiate them, because you don't learn anything about them. Anyways, on to my last topic here, pacing. I give the pacing a 4 out of 10. And the reason, so to explain first, the first 50 pages and the last 50, maybe 75 pages are actually pretty exciting. And I did start reading this book. So last night I put the book down at about 300 pages. There's 400 total in the book. This morning, I, read up until page, let's say 330, and then there was sort of like a whirlwind that hooked me until the end. However, yesterday when I was reading this at page 200, I was counting and seeing how many pages are in this damn book. I don't know if I can finish this. There's like this huge section in the middle that is, it's not that interesting to me, at least. It's a lot of like political intrigue, very subtle maneuvering, and it feels a lot like the characters just like going in circles and like having the same conversations with sometimes the same people, sometimes different people over and over again, and making very small changes every time. And it just like, it doesn't do it for me. So the pacing, it was a struggle. Like I had to convince myself, okay, I'm 200 pages in. I just have 200 left. I'm already over halfway done. I may as well just finish this thing. I've heard that the ending's good, so I'm just going to like power through. It's only going to take me another few hours. I just got like, if I'm doing the calculation of how many hours do I have left to read through this book to be done with it, I think that like the pacing takes a hit. One of the ways that I was thinking about this was, a lot of this book is like if you were reading A Song of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones books, but the only scenes you had were scenes where people were like talking around meals. That is what a lot of this book ends up being like. And those are interesting parts of A Song of Ice and Fire, but only because they're like within this larger plot of like things happening and like whatever. There's not a whole lot of that in this book, in my opinion, at least. I think there are a lot of people out there, if you look at the Goodreads reviews, you'll see like this book is kind of polarizing. There's people who really like that type of book, and to them, the pacing is going to be a 10 out of 10 and they're going to love it. So I don't want to necessarily dissuade you by this, but my bias is towards books that have a little bit more action and less just like talking about action. A little bit less. I like plotting and that kind of thing, but I also like seeing the plots done out maybe a little bit more quickly. So ultimately, will I keep reading this series? There is at least 2 more books in the series that are already published, and it looks like on Goodreads there was like a name of a 4th book. I don't know if it's going to be published or just whatever, but my answer is maybe and probably not. So the ending was good, but I'm not like so enthralled by the ending that I'm willing to read another book where I may be severely bored in the middle just to reach another ending that's interesting. I think that there's a lot of books out there. There's a lot of things on my to be read list, and a lot of them don't necessarily have this like massive slump in the middle. So, maybe one day I'll be intrigued enough and want to dive back in. I'll be curious enough about what happens, or maybe I'll read something about, another book by the same author, and I'll hop back in and try to read it. But at least as of now, I don't have any plans to continue reading. I think the next book is called The Traitor Baru Cormorant. But I will say that I think people that are more interested in like political intrigue books with maybe a little bit less action, there's no like magic or anything that happens in this book. It's all just like learning about the empire, learning about the political maneuverings of this savant girl and all this stuff. You may be more interested in this book than I was, but it didn't really do it for me. If you have read this book and you're interested in more of my opinions, I will be posting a book discussion video. I'm going to record it right after this. I have a bunch of notes about some of my various theories about what happened and things that I liked and didn't like in more depth. That's going to be spoilery. But yeah, that's it for my review. So let me know what you thought in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.